messiah of the new conservative movement is clearly Ronald Reagan. Now, you may remember we talked about him. He put out the record attacking Medicare, saying if we passed Medicare, you'd one day tell your grandkids you remember what it was like when people were free. He had also done a very high-profile commercial for Barry Goldwater. And then in 1966, he runs for, and he gets elected to be the governor of California. Now, when he runs for the governor of California, he runs on the idea that he's going to start charging for California public universities. That's right. It used to be that if you graduated high school in California, you could go to university in California for free. There was no cost for tuition. Now, there was no economic crisis. It wasn't true that the state desperately needed the money from the colleges. So you may wonder, how do you win an election promising to charge people for a service they had previously gotten for free? Well, what he was doing was he was saying, look at all the hippies and the anti-war protesters and the civil rights activists in college. Clearly, they're a bunch of low-rent deadbeats. So if we start charging people to go to college, we'll get all the riffraff out, and you won't have to put up with all those nasty, dirty protesters anymore. And it worked. A conservative backlash in California took him to the governorship in 1966. In 1976, he challenges Ford for the nomination, which is a bold move to challenge a sitting president. And he almost beats Ford. Ford, whose VP was Nelson Rockefeller, is not liked by the conservatives. Rockefeller had been very liberal. He was one of the earlier liberal Republicans. He had divorced his wife and married a much younger woman, which did not sit well with religious conservatives. Conservatives also hated Ford's, and Nixon's for that matter, attempt at easing tensions with the Soviet Union. They felt like we were in bed with the enemy, that we were giving up in the Cold War. When Ford pardoned draft dodgers, or started the process anyway, that was kind of the end of conservatives and any interest they had in Gerald Ford. Draft dodgers from the Vietnam War, by the way, would not finally be pardoned until Carter, but Ford started that process. Carter, remember, had given the Panama Canal back to Panama, which angered conservatives who believed in American exceptionalism, that America was the greatest and we shouldn't have to deal with other countries. In 1976, Ford, trying to appease conservatives, dumped his vice president, Nelson Rockefeller, for Bob Dole. And conservatives end up writing his platform, the things that he will run on. But in the end, Ford holds on to the nomination. But Ronald Reagan becomes a major national Republican celebrity after the 1976 Republican primary. There's a couple of quotes from Reagan. If you want to pause these and check these out, kind of his ideas on his way up. At the heart of the conservative movement is a tax revolt. In 1978, a California activist named Howard Jarvis, a wealthy man, launched Proposition 13. And what it would do was it would lower property taxes, and it would make it so that 2/3 of the California state legislature, both houses, had to vote to raise taxes. It would essentially stop California from being able to raise taxes, no matter how bad they needed them. Actions like these will spread to other states, and America became obsessed with this kind of tax fever, this rejection of taxation. Now, critics point that this separates taxation from what you get for it. It separates what you pay from what you get. People didn't necessarily demand the government do any less. They just didn't want to pay for it. So everybody wanted the cops to show up when their house got broken into, or the ambulance to show up when you got a heart attack. You just don't want to pay any taxes to actually pay for that. And so we move into this period in American history where we seem to have this psychological disassociation between government programs that people tend to demand and the taxes that go to pay for those programs. And there's a little bit of Proposition 13. In the 1980 primaries, Carter is in trouble. His popularity is extremely low because of the hostage crisis. He's seen as anemic and weak because he can't get the hostages back from Iran. Then he's challenged by a third Kennedy to run for president, Teddy Kennedy. And Kennedy does very well in the primaries and further undermines Carter's position. Reagan runs for the Republican primary, promising massive tax cuts. He criticizes both Nixon and Ford and Carter for being nice to the Soviets, for things like strategic arms talks to limit nuclear weapons. And he refers to the Soviet Union as an evil empire. If you elect him, you'll get huge tax cuts, and he'll get back to fighting against the Soviets and stop negotiating with them. Reagan wins. In the end, the race opens up at the end, and Reagan ends up winning by a comfortable, as you can see, a very comfortable electoral margin. Republicans take the Senate for the first time since 1952, and the Democrats controlled the House, but it was controlled really by a coalition of Republicans and Southern conservative congressmen. The reason for Reagan doing so well in this election was what they called the Reagan Democrats. And these, in many cases, referred to basically Democrats who were angry about race issues. We saw that Nixon used his Southern strategy to try to get Southern voters who had traditionally voted Democrat to reject the Democratic Party because it had become the party of blacks. Here's an amazing interview from the New York Times. You should read it. But just to give you the idea, this is from Lee Atwater, Reagan's campaign strategist. He says, you start out in 1954 by saying, N-word, N-word, N-word. I'm not going to say it. By 1968, you can't say that. That hurts you. It backfires. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. You're getting so abstract now that starting about cutting taxes and all these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and a byproduct of them is that blacks get hurt worse than whites. And subconsciously, maybe that is part of it. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that if it is getting that abstract and that coded, that we're doing away with the racial problem one way or the other. You follow me? So what he's saying is, when they talk about cutting the government, shrinking the government, reducing government spending, the implication is we're going to take away all those programs that help black people. Because the attack from the conservatives is they're taking all your money and giving it to them. Reagan talked very famously in 1980 about an imaginary welfare queen who had, a black woman who had a ton of kids and drove around in a Cadillac and made, $80,000 or something, whatever it was, a year off of food stamps and welfare programs, basically taking money out of your pocket. This was completely made up. There was no woman like this at all. Nobody's ever found anything like this. It was entirely made up. But it stoked those fears and resentments and anger conservatives had about government programs that went to helping the poor. And when I say poor, I think Lee Atwater here makes it clear that what he really means is minority.